Gail, I'm wondering, like, now, as you start to have these moments of satori and epiphany and start to integrate, well, you had integrated no-till, but integrate sort of another generation of no-till and cover cropping and animal rotation and managed grazing, et cetera. What's going on in what's happening with the land, but also what's happening kind of culturally, with other farmers? I mean, are you like the weirdo hippie out there as you start to integrate some of these practices?
He wears flip-flops now.
Yeah, I see that.
That's about it.
I'm in California with a bunch of tree-hugging hippies. So by 2000, we're 100 plus years into plowing the prairie now, down to 2 crops. And, I mentioned the inputs that we're now just, so the farm went from diversity and inputs and did this in my lifetime. And so starting in the early 2000s, and it was actually 2002, 2003, when I was 40 years old, that I finally learned that soil was alive. It was supposed to be alive. It obviously wasn't. I'd never been taught anything other than soil was a medium to put a seed in, and the soil was just there to kind of hold the plant in place while we added whatever we needed to try to keep it alive long enough to harvest something. And so I went on this sharp learning curve in the early 2000s, started learning about, the soil microbiome and the cover crops really clicked. And that's also when I first learned that carbon wasn't just something in a pencil. That was my only knowledge of carbon at that time. And really went on this big kick of feeding carbon to the soil. And that the first aha moment there is we brought wheat back into the rotation. And up until that point, the cover crops were kind of clicky for me. I'd heard them talked about, but I really wasn't making them work. And outside of just being fun to look at, we really weren't seeing any positive effects until we saw that first wheat crop, and the whole farm just turned like that, or that field did. And that's when I realized it wasn't about the wheat, it wasn't about the chemicals or the fertilizers, any of that. It was literally about the carbon in that wheat that I was getting into that soil. And so we just did a 180 right then, and within 10 years, we had a 5-year rotation, and we had about 13 or 14 different crops we were plugging in and out of that rotation. And soybeans went from every other year in the rotation to once every 5 years. And it wasn't even soybeans, it was the non-carbon crop, whether it might be sunflowers or mung beans, but only 1 year out of 5, we was putting in a low carbon crop in that system. And the more I fed the system, the hungrier it got. It was just literally became a beast that you almost couldn't feed once you brought it to life. And that's why we had to take soybeans almost out, because they weren't feeding anything to the system. At the same time as we brought more diversity into the system, crop-wise, we just went back like that. And the inputs just collapsed. And so soil test we did in the late 90s, 98, 99, I was farming 3,200 acres, and our soil organic matter across the board was somewhere between 1.7 and 2.2%, which probably when my great-great-grandfathers first plowed the prairie was probably somewhere between 7 and 10 plus percent. So by 2006, 2007, we've got everything back above 3%. By 2010, we're 5 to 7% organic matter, and we have one plot that's over 10%.
Wow.
So that number is amazing, because that's not even thought to be possible, right?
No,
so if you go to an agronomist and say, what's the maximum carbon content you have soil, they'll tell you maybe 2 or 3 or 4.
Yeah.
But 10% is heresy. That's amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I started trying to dig into it, or, what we were and what I should be shooting for, and I couldn't even get anybody to tell me 10%. But the rogue farmers and scientists told me we were probably above 10%. When the buffalo left.
What are sort of the knock-on impacts or the downstream impacts of being able to fix that carbon? Like, what's happening in the soil and then subsequently in the plant? So I made my first attempt at no-till in the 80s. We failed miserably, and in 94 we went back and started again. And there was a handful of farmers doing no-till at the time, and they told me within 3 years the earthworms would return. And basically my life
would never have another bad day, literally. That the rains would fall gently, the sun would shine.
Consistently. Yeah,
and they were right. In 3 years, we could take a spade out, and if we dug 10 or 15 times, we could find an earthworm. But we were still eroding soil rapidly, and the system was dead. But by 2006, 7, 8, we're digging earthworms in every spadeful of soil. We did PLFA test, I think in 2009 or 10, and that's a photolipid fatty acid test that actually counts the microbes in the soil. And we compared my best farm ground to some unbroke native prairie that was about 2 miles away, and we had higher counts than the prairie did. Probably one of the biggest changes that was a little scary for a farmer to take was the insects that just, we had every insect in Kansas, I think, showed up on our farm. And as a farmer, we're trained to kill these things. But I also knew that ladybugs are supposed to be good things. I just, we were never trained any of this. I knew they were good. It goes back to what you know and what you've been taught. And so that's when I stumbled across an entomologist from South Dakota State, Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, and we went and listened to him speak, and finally got confirmation that we were on the right track. And we saw that. We would get a call from the agronomist. Well, we've got aphids attacking the grain sorghum crops or the corn crops, and we need to get you on the list to get it sprayed. And I'm like, we got a lot of lacewings and a lot of ladybugs. I think I'll wait a day or two.
Yeah. And
that kind of became my mantra. Is I gave it a 48-hour thing, because we couldn't lose a crop to insects. We couldn't afford it financially. I didn't want to spray, but we couldn't go broke. So I had this 48-hour rule we put in, and I would give it 48 hours and see if the predators showed up, and in every instance they did. But when your agronomist is calling you and saying, well, your neighbors have already all turned in their order, and if you don't go along, they'll be renting your farm next year. And that's a quote. I mean, that's the pressure that's being put on you. But never once did I fall for that. Once I got it figured out. In the beginning, obviously I did. But once life started coming back to the farm and we started feeding the system, I mean, we realized Mother Nature's there to help if we just get out of the way and let her. Yeah. And, our infiltration rates, which is how fast our soil can soak in water. And this could be important in California, maybe.
You think?
We didn't measure that. All we did was baseline soil test in the 90s to see how much nitrogen we needed to buy. But by talking with NRCS and other soil officials on our farm with our organic matter the way it was in the late 90s, our infiltration rates would have been around a ½ inch an hour. By 2010, our worst soil was 6 inches an hour. And in 2018, we were infiltrating the first inch of rainfall in 9 seconds and the second inch in 20 seconds.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this interview from the Commune podcast, then click subscribe and check out this video right here.